record like I always do. And let's jump into our meeting here. So welcome to our September 2020 technical meeting. The main topic of today's meeting is going to be, we're going to talk about justifying non-energy conservation measures on the audit. But before we jump into all that, I wanted to cover a few things I've got listed here on our agenda. So a couple of training opportunities. We put a energy auditor class on the calendar. It's in October. It's that last week of October, the week of Halloween. This is the class where we only have 4 seats in the class because of the amount of time it takes to take the tests. We have, very limited space there, and 3 of those 4 seats have been taken. So I only have 1 seat left. You do have to have a letter from BPI saying that you've passed off all their prerequisites and that you're ready to come take the test. And so that's your ticket. So if you want to be in that class, the next person to send me a copy of their letter from BPI gets that last seat. We
also don't forget our internal prerequisites.
Yeah, there are also, the state has some of its own prerequisites, and you have to finish all of those before you come to the class as well. And if you are not sure what those are, you'll want to send me an email, because I've got a form that lays all of them out. It's got a list of all the state prerequisites and all the BPI prerequisites. And we just call it that energy auditor in training application. Anyway, basically, if you'll work through all that, you want to make sure all of those things are completed before you come to the class. But yeah, in order to get a seat, you got to have a letter from BPI. And then we will probably hold this class again in the spring. So if you are, you've been working towards this, but you still got a ways to go, I would strongly encourage you to finish it as soon as you can. I would set a goal for myself to be done in December or January. That way, when we put this on the calendar for spring, then you'll be ready with your letter and you'll be able to get a seat, because we'll do the exact same thing. It'll be the first 4 people with a letter. So anyway, so that's the BPI EA class is coming up in October. Again, that's a 4-day class. So those of you who are coming, be prepared to be there for those 4 days. And by the end of the week, if you're ready, you should have your energy auditor certification. So the other training opportunities, the state, we started our fall technical training last week. We had our first of 3 groups up at the training center. So this was in-person training. We had a bunch of COVID protocols in place so that we could do some social distancing and try to maintain as much safety as we possibly could. We had the folks from Uinta Basin, from southeastern Utah, and some of the people from Utah Community Action up there. We appreciate you guys coming and participating. I know I had a good time. I hope that those who were there had a good time and learned a few things along the way. But we are looking forward to seeing the rest of you up at the training center during this month of September. It's not for a few weeks, but we're going to have another group up there on the 21st and 22nd. So Bragg and Mountain Lands, and then some more folks from Utah Community Action. And then the second half of that week will be 5 and 6 County and the remainder of Yucca. So this is that all hands on deck training. So unless you've got some health issues going on or something serious, we'd like you to make sure that you're there. So please put that on your calendars and plan to be there.
I'm prepared to do wear some work. You will be getting
We'll have a few sets of coveralls. It was pretty toasty up there last week, and I don't think people were too excited about wearing coveralls, and a few people went home with some mastic on their clothes. So, yeah, thanks for that, Dalton. Anyway, is anybody aware of any other training opportunities that this group should know about? If you are, you're welcome to speak up, or as always, just send them my way, and I'll try to vet them and send them out to the group as appropriate. So, all right, a couple of smaller issues that we wanted to go through before we jump into the main topic today. The first one, I'm going to let Dalton take here. It just says issue tracking. Let me see if I can pull something up on my screen, and then I'll let Dalton talk about that for a minute. My goodness, if I could get the tools out of my way.
All right, so we had a discussion as a team at the state, and we were looking at the categories and the items we're having you guys collect on QCI issue tracking in your central repositories. And we ended up adding a column. It's column F, and it's training categories or training category. And we added this to help standardize the issues. So as you go through your issues, if you guys will add that to it, make sure you're filling that out. That'll help us and help you guys actually filter through and categorize each of the issues so you can see what area you need training in. Do you guys have any questions on that? If you're not using this WAP report on the Google Drive and you're using your own sheet, your own repository, you do need to add this column. Just add a column with training category, and if you could add in the different categories to that we have listed here, that would work awesome. So that's all I had on that.
There's one thing to point out at Dalton. Those categories that we picked there, those align with the generalization of different tasks associated with the JTAs. So for those of you that watched the coordinators meeting, when we went over those slides where we did the assessments, the tests for everybody last fall and winter, and we took those results and just came up with some general categories, whether it be the codes and standards, construction basics, and so on. And what we wanted to do was we felt that this would help bridge or make that connection to those JTA general tasks and things like that. So that's part of the reason we want to do that. And then the other thing to point out on this is this year, Wade will be coming to all 7 of the agencies and doing training at your agency. Half of the day will be a training that we establish that's Wade's already set. And the other half of the day will be a training that you, as your agency, you determine what that training will be. Our only requirement is you're going to have to demonstrate to us how you came to that conclusion using your own information. So while Matt Turner has made it very easy for you with the WAP reports tool that he created in Google Sheets. Of course, you're always welcome to use your own products and tools that you see best fit for you. We just would like to see some correlation in that category tracking. That way we can use that to roll up better into our training plan development overall for the program.
And I'll be scrutinizing your process that you use to come up with your training very vigorously.
Did you have anything else on that, Wade, on your half-day stuff or on the trainings that you'll be doing?
No, Brad pretty well covered the half-day stuff. I've got to work my schedule out. I'll be reaching out to each of the coordinators individually to put that together. I just want to let you guys know, I promise, I know you've been hearing it come out of my mouth for a few months now, I will be doing the RMGA online class, RMGA, Rocky Mountain Gas Association online class. I intend to send out the first email initiating that class this week. I'm sorry for the delay. Had family problems and stuff going on, and just got behind, and it fell on the back burner. So, but it will be. I will be sending out an email this week, and we will get that started and get that going on. So, I think that's all I have.
Awesome. Thank you. Anybody got any questions on these things? All right. The next smaller item that I just wanted to talk about really quickly was I'm calling it Duct Status. I sent out an email last week to this group, to the technical meeting group, and I just included these forms. So these are the forms that Burl down here at Mountain Lands created. Dalton and I are sitting at Mountain Lands this morning because we're starting our monitoring for the year. But I've added a couple of things to Burl's forms. I really like his forms a lot. I've used them as I've done audits, and they flow really well. But again, so these are A03 field collection forms. You don't have to use these forms, but you are required to collect all of the pertinent and required information when you are conducting an audit. So if you don't have this information on your forms, you need to add it to your forms, or just start using the forms that I sent you. So the couple of things that I added a checkbox on Burl's forms just to help me remember to set the fridge meter. And then at the end of the form, he's got, the information to collect from the fridge meter. But this is what I wanted to make sure everybody's aware of. You've been required for quite some time to actually collect information about the duct status in every home. One of the classes that for the two groups that have not been up to the training center yet this month, one of the classes we'll talk about this in detail, is just basically collecting that duct status. But I want to make sure that everybody's doing it right now, that you're not waiting another couple of weeks before you start doing it. So basically, make sure that this information is being collected on your field collection forms. There's these 3 questions, just is there any ductwork in the home? If there is ductwork in the home, is there any duct outside of the conditioned space? And then is there any uninsulated duct? You need to document that on your field collection forms. This is something that our whole program really struggled with doing over the last few years. So I'm going to get very prescriptive about how it should be done. And then along with that, if there is ductwork outside the conditioned space, you're required to conduct a duct leakage test and document the results. And so if you're doing that with a pressure pan, then you should be documenting that here. If you're doing that with the duct blaster, then you should be documenting that here. So make sure that you're doing that. If you have questions, immediate questions about it, feel free to shoot me an email or give me a call after the meeting. But if not, just take this form out, give it a try, and then we'll talk more about it in a couple of weeks up at the training center. So any questions about that for right now?
If you can't get to the ductwork, even though it's outside the envelope, should you still test it?
Yes, you should be conducting the test in every home. And one of the things that we will talk about in that training is just exactly this question. Like if there's limited space under the home, or if all of the ductwork is buried under drywall and stuff, then what do we do? What are you required to do? And the short answer is that yes, you want to test it. And if you do find major duct leakage, you may be required to get into some drywall if there was some, like this would be worst case scenario. But in most circumstances, we're going to talk about how you can at least do some sealing of the duct boots from inside the home and a few things like that. So, and also this is something that we have not done a good job of testing in and testing out on. And so we're we're asking you guys to start sealing duct boots and a few things that you can reach, and we would like you to start testing in and testing out so that we can see as a program whether or not that's effective. So, great question. Any other questions? All right. Oh, one last thing I wanted to cover. Just as a reminder, Brad's been really good to help me try and remember to do this. I feel like I'm one of the worst at this, but just wanted to remind this whole group about whenever you're communicating with the state, whenever you're reaching out to Wade or Brad or Dalton or myself, will you guys make sure that your coordinators are in the loop on that? We really want to avoid any situation where it would even look like you're going around your boss so anytime you're reaching out to the state, kind of check yourself, make sure that you've communicated with your boss. We're here to help, and we want to help, and we appreciate when you guys are reaching out to us. It helps us to stay in touch with what's going on. But just make sure you're communicating with your bosses before you're reaching out to us. And coordinators, again, like if it's something that, if it's a question that they're dealing with, and it would be best for them just to get in touch with us. We love to have your staff reach out to us and communicate with us. We just want to make sure that you guys are talking about it and seeing if you can find solutions at your agencies first. And then just in an effort to try and help everybody remember to do this, I'm going to do my best to try and CC, whenever I do get questions from you guys, I'll try and CC your coordinators just to make sure that I'm helping keep them in the loop as well, as far as the answers that you're getting. And so that's something that we'll be trying to do better at the state level as well. So any questions on that or concerns? All right. Well, with that, that was all the new business and training opportunities. So let's get into the main topic for today. The main topic is it came from the energy audit monitoring from last year, and I showed this slide during last month's training. These were my top 5, and today's meeting I wanted to focus on item number 4, and that was that the justifying of itemized costs on the audit. And if you're not quite sure what that means, I'll get into that in just a second, but just wanted to talk about why we're training on it. And it was because of this. This is something we have a high error rate on right now. I found in my monitoring last year that 47% of the files that I monitored did not properly justify all of the itemized costs on the audit. And that this was happening, or there were 6 out of the 7 agencies had errors on them. So that's why we want to talk about it today. To get into this, the first thing would be I want to go into the guidelines and just talk about what the foundational policy is when it comes to this, and so, or really what it is we're trying to accomplish by justifying this stuff on the audit. So in section B9, and this is the section that I hope all energy auditors are very familiar with, section B9. But for everybody on the call today, so if you're an energy auditor, the energy auditors were the ones I went out and measured, and we had a 47% error rate. So I hope you guys are paying close attention and thinking about the things that you can do to improve that. For QCIs, you guys are the second window at the drive-through. You're the ones that should be checking this. So I hope you guys will pay close attention as well. Make sure you understand what it is you should be looking for when you're reviewing these audits. And then for all field staff, you may notice that when this stuff is documented properly, it might actually have some helpful information, help you understand why you're installing some of the things that we're installing on jobs and stuff. So anyway, so with that, this is the guidance in section B9. Just under the first general clause, this says that the audit determines work. And it says that the NEMEA audit shall be used to determine all work to be done on a dwelling. So we use the audit to determine everything that we do. And then this next line is where we're having some issues. It says any work to be done on a dwelling must be documented and justified in the audit reports. And I feel like we do a pretty good job of documenting all the work that we're supposed to be doing. I do find from time to time some measure becomes, while the guys are out working, they realize that it's necessary to install a measure that the auditor wasn't aware of. And so that measure then gets added to the audit. From time to time, communication breaks down and the measure doesn't get added to the audit, but ultimately it really is supposed to be, because all work we do should be documented and justified on the audit. But for the most part, we're doing pretty good at documenting it, but it's the justification that I feel like just sometimes we just forget to justify some of the measures is really all that's going on. But what do I mean by justifying? Like what is that? Anybody want to take a stab at that as far as what that justification is?
Somebody who's on a phone needs to mute themselves.
It might be Scott. But yeah,
No, not us.
No, we're just getting a lot of background noise. So yeah, if you'll check, and if there's some noise in the background, if you'll mute yourself until you're ready to talk. But yeah, does anybody want to take a guess at what do we mean by justifying stuff on the audit? And be brave, or I'll call on you. Not sure which is worse, right? Yeah. Jake. Since I'm here at MAG and Jake's hiding in his office. Is Jake hiding in his office, or is he at home? Jake, you want to take a stab at it? What does it mean to justify something on the audit?
You gotta have a good reason why you're doing it.
You need to have a good reason why you're doing it?
Justified.
Yeah, that is it. I think justified is a big fancy word for just that. Just what's the reason that you're installing this measure? So thank you for that. That's I think my next slide says something along those lines. Justification just equals why. Like all we're really after on the audit is you need to explain why you're installing the measure. Some of you have probably heard me explain this before, but did you guys know that your auditors are still determining eligibility? You guys have great intake staff, and they determine whether or not your clients are eligible for weatherization. But we're not done with eligibility at that point. We then send our auditors out to every house, and they determine which measures that house might be eligible for. And when you guys are doing your intake work, you're required to like document and justify or show how that client was eligible for the program. We collect information about their income and the number of people in their household, and we document all of that very well. Well, your auditors have to do the same thing. They have to document and show why each of the measures that are going to be installed, why that house was eligible to receive those measures. So yeah, we're just after why. That's really all it is, and it's not as complex as it might sound. Really, all it is when you're writing a measure on the audit, you just need to explain why you're installing that measure, and it's something that we forget. So This is, well, there's a little bit of language and then a table or a chart that some of you may not be aware of. Some of you may have seen it and then kind of forgotten about it. But I wanted to take a few minutes and just talk about what's in this table. First, I want to read this language and then we'll talk about the table. And then after that, I've got some audits, and I wanted to kind of go through the audits, and we'll talk about whether or not these audits have done a good job of justifying each measure or not. So
Hey, Matt,
go ahead.
can I just take a moment and interject something here?
Yeah.
Just because I looked at a whole ton of BWRs yesterday.
Absolutely.
That were heating crisis, and the justification was furnace wouldn't turn on. So is that an acceptable justification?
That's a great example and great question. Anybody want to take a stab at an answer on that one? I wouldn't dare, because I think you all know the answer. It's probably not quite enough information there. We would probably like a little bit a better explanation than just that the furnace wouldn't turn on. In fact, to me, that raises a bunch of questions about whether or not the person that went out and looked at that furnace, just to what length they went to figure out what was going on. If the furnace is just not turning on and your answer is to just throw $3,000 at it and replace it, then we need to do a little bit of training, I guess. We need to do a little improving there, but hopefully that's not what's going on, but that's not a sufficient answer. So, and
Thank you.
And we'll talk about that. And hopefully you as a group here will actually kind of talk about, what we could do to flesh that out a little bit so that everybody has a better understanding of why the furnace was swapped out. And what Wade's talking about is an example that I wanted to make sure and discuss as well. So we're specifically going to look at the energy audit and the weatherization program, but we are also required to do the same documentation and justification on all of our crisis measures. In the crisis program, you don't have to run the energy audit. You have some other process, and the place that you're required to document and justify why you did the measure is on the BWR that Wade was talking about. So down in the comment section on the BWR, that's where you explain why did you do that measure. So, but with that, so in order to help everybody with this whole documenting and justification process, we've kind of set a standard in our program on how we identify measures on the audit. And we've been calling that, identifying them by type. So identifying a measure by type on the audit. And this says, since the audit tool is the tool we use to document and justify every measure we install on a dwelling, it is important that every measure shall be identified on the audit as one of the 4, and really we've added the 5th one, measure types. So we require that you identify them as one of the 5 measure types. And auditors are doing a fantastic job at this. You guys are we're very minimal issues with that. But that's just the first part of this justification process. So it says identifying the measure type completes the justification process for an energy conservation measure. And for some, and the language doesn't say that, but it's really for some health and safety measure. And then it partially completes the justification process for some health and safety, and for incidental repairs, and for non-audited measures, and for crisis measures. So just simply identifying the fact that they're HSM or an IRM or an NAM, that's the first part of the process, but you're not quite done yet. It says each measure is to be identified by type and meet the additional justification requirements listed in the table below. So here's the table. I think I got a better screenshot of the table, make it a little bigger here. Here's the table. And so for an ECM, for energy conservation measure, the table just says how to identify the measure on the audit, and then is there any additional justification required? And then there's also this column just for the funding sources, which we're really not going to talk about today, but I drew that in there on the table in case it's helpful. But for an energy conservation measure, how do you identify them? Well, it says that ECMs appear on the recommended measures report with a measure SIR of 1 or greater. And then is there any additional justification required? No. Like the audit already did the cost justification for that energy conservation measure. If it has an SIR of 1 or greater, that's it. Like that is how we proved that that house was eligible for that measure. But then, and when you're doing the audit, that really makes up like 2/3 of the tabs on the audit. That's when you put in the shell and the heating and cooling and all of your base loads. Most of what's going on there is it's determining whether or not the house is eligible for any energy conservation measure. Then after you're done with that, then the real work begins. We get down to the part where we now have to like make a list of all the other things that should be installed on the house because of whatever's going on in the situation. And those are all the itemized costs. So on that itemized cost tab, we put all of these other measures. So when we're writing a health and safety measure on the itemized cost tab, how do we identify them? Well, it says that you need to list the health and safety measure as an itemized cost with the HSM written in front of the measure, and we're doing a great job of that. And then it says additional justification required. And on this section, there's a yes part and there's a no part. Yes says you must document why the HSM was necessary and allowable. And then there's some of these that are a no, and it says HSMs that are required on every home, such as ASHRAE, smoke and COs, and I would also say a vapor barrier, and that would be about the complete list. They need no additional explanation. So there are some health and safety measures that basically, the explanation was there was bare dirt in the basement or in the crawl space, and therefore the house needed a vapor barrier according to our standards. So it's really not necessary for you to go to any great lengths to explain why you did some of these, but there's a bunch of other health and safety measures that you're not going to be doing them on every home, and that's when you're required to write down why. What was the unique situation at this house that warranted you doing that measure? So for an incidental repair, it's the same thing. You're going to list the itemized cost. You're going to list it as an itemized cost with the incidental repair or IRM written in front of the measure. And then is there additional justification required? Yes, there is. Always, always, always. An incidental repair is unique because it requires two things. First off, you must document the energy conservation measure that the IRM was incidental to. So an incidental repair is always going to be, basically we have an energy conservation measure that we can't install unless we first address an incidental repair, or that if we do start to install it, then because of us installing it, we're going to have to also do this extra repair that we wouldn't normally do on every single house. This one house has this unique situation, and that's why we're going to call it an incidental repair. So the first thing you do is you have to document which ECM was this incidental repair incidental to. And then the second part is you need to explain the why. You have to describe how it protects or enhances the ECM. So, because that is the definition of an IRM, is something that needed to be done, and it needs to be done because it's going to either protect or enhance or allow the installation of the ECM. So the IRM is probably the most difficult one to justify, just simply because you have to remember one extra thing. You're, explaining why, but you also have to remember to say it's incidental to the attic insulation or something like that. And I'll show you some examples of that in a minute. And then for the non-audited measures and the crisis measures, these are both pretty much the same. You're going to list them as an itemized cost using the appropriate acronym, either an NAM or a CRM. Now, we've talked about this in a few trainings in the past, but it wouldn't hurt to say it again. We now are, if you know that you are going to be addressing something under your crisis program with your crisis funding, and it is something that you do identify during the weatherization process, you've got options. You can either turn it in and report it on a crisis BWR, and have a separate crisis file, and in that separate crisis file is where you'll have all your documentation and justification. Or you can also just simply use the audit and document it there as a CRM, and then you still have to turn in the BWR with the crisis measure on it. But you can use the audit as the place that you're going to document the reasoning. So if you're going to put it on the audit, you just need to make sure you're identifying it as a crisis measure. Otherwise, most of the non-audited measures, are going to end up being NAMs on the audit. But you got to identify it as one or the other. And then, is there additional justification required? Yes. For an NAM, you must document why the NAM is necessary and allowable without an SIR. Because most of the time, an NAM is something that you evaluated it and you found that it did not have a savings to investment ratio, as an ECM, but you still feel like there's something going on where you need to install that measure. There are a few NAMs that we really don't have a way to evaluate their savings, at least not through the audit, like an attic dam is one of them. Like, we know there's energy savings there. The audit's not designed to estimate that. But anyway, when it comes to an NAM, you need to document the why. Why was this necessary without it being cost justified with an SIR? And then for a CRM, same thing. Yes, you must document why the CRM is necessary and allowable under the crisis program. So you're going to explain, based on this particular aspect of the crisis program, that's why this was allowable to install this water heater or whatever. So that's the table. We may jump back and forth between this table and some audits here for a minute, but does anybody have any questions about the table, or have any concerns or anything that they'd like answered or better explanation on? All right. Now, this might be something I wanted to, bring this or show this table to everyone. If you feel like you struggled with this, I'd recommend that you print off a copy of this table, and the next time you're writing some of these itemized costs, that you kind of use this table to check yourself and make sure that you documented everything properly. So hopefully it can serve as a little bit of a tool. So with that, I want to jump into some audits. Now these are just example audits, and I have basically kind of set some of these up so that some of them are good and some of them are bad, and I wanted to talk about why. So please, if you're out there, I would encourage you to join in the conversation here. So with that, let's jump into a couple audits and talk about some examples. So as I mentioned before, like when you're in the audit, pretty much these first, the information tab, the shell, heating, cooling, ducts, and base loads, all of those things are figuring out energy conservation measures. And then we do our health and safety inspection, and and then we have to use our brains and think about, okay, if we're going to install all these other things, then do we need to do any other additional, incidental repairs and stuff? But we put all of that stuff down here on the itemized cost tab. And so I've got some itemized costs here. I wanted to click through them and just ask you guys about them. So here's the first one. This one says it's an HSM to fix any other venting related problem. So as I just mentioned, some HSMs really don't need any additional justification, but some of them do. So how do you guys feel about this one? Does this one need any additional justification?
It needs to be tied to an ECM.
So Chambers says it needs to be tied to an ECM, and that's I have been teaching that, and yes, it like really there is always going to be a connection from an HSM to an ECM. What else? Is this a good enough explanation about what's going to happen? This just says
Not very specific.
Yeah, it's not, and that's the thing that I've had. I see this one quite often. I think I have. Let me switch to this next one here. What if it said this in the comments? So it says to fix an orphaned water heater flue, 3-inch water heater flue going into a 6-inch common with furnace. Furnace is to be replaced with a direct vent furnace. So from that, I can see that during the weatherization process, or maybe a crisis in conjunction with weatherization, they're going to swap out the furnace and orphan the water heater. So I can at least infer that we're going to be doing something that's going to leave the water heater orphaned, and that's what we're trying to fix. Is that sufficient justification? What do you guys think? Let's see, Seth from 6 County. What do you think? Is this a good enough justification for this measure? If he's able to find his unmute button and jump in there, or I'll take something from Carrie Lynn if you're there. All right. I'll call on others in a minute, but I'll go ahead and answer this one. But stay close to your mute buttons because I will call on you. This one is, I feel like it's sufficient justification. Yeah, it could be written clearer. There's 1,000 different ways you could write this, but I feel like all the elements are there. I think a reasonable person can understand that that's what was happening on this one. But if it's written like this, as Bolander mentioned, this one's just way too vague. Like any other venting related problem, I don't know about that. You could also just write a better description or measure name. Like if the measure name said to fix the water heater that was orphaned during weatherization, then you may not need any comments at all because that name alone explains and justifies exactly why you're doing it. So here's another one. What about this? HSM to fix improper venting clothes dryer. And then the comments say that the clothes dryer is vented with vinyl, needs to be hard piped per SWS 6.6005.3b. Is that one a good justification? And since this is a health and safety measure, do we need to even justify that one? Anyone want to weigh in?
I think it looks good.
Yeah, I'm pretty happy with this one. If this did not have these comments though, then it would not have enough justification, because this is a health and safety measure that I do see fix improper venting on the clothes dryer, but I really don't know what it is you're supposed to be doing without actually going into the house and looking at it. And that's really what's missing. Like, why are we going to fix it? What was improper about it? And I thought they did a great job of, some of these are actually real examples and some of them I've tweaked. But yeah, this one was a real example and I thought they did a fantastic job of explaining why. So, what about this one? HSM to fix improper venting of the bathroom exhaust fan. Let's see. What about somebody from the basin? Isaac, are you there? What do you think about this one? Does this one need any more justification? It looks like Isaac is trying to answer, but maybe his audio.
I would say it needs more justification.
Yeah, I agree. Do you want to? What would you write there? Give us an example of what might be going on.
Well, you would just need to write exactly what you saw, if it was vented properly, and what the issue was with the venting that you looked at when you were doing the audit.
So give me an example of something you've seen in a house when you might use this, or you might write this measure up. What's some of the improper venting you see on a bathroom?
Improper materials, improper sizing, uninsulated in an attic, things like that.
Okay. So let's write one of these. So let's say that it's terminating in the attic. So if this just said that the exhaust fan does not terminate at the exterior, or it terminates in the attic, what do you think? Would that be sufficient justification?
It's better, but you probably still need more info.
Yeah, it wouldn't hurt to have a little more info. And what do you feel like's missing, Kyle?
What type of termination you would need, and what type of material it was vented in.
Yeah, so we're gonna vent it to the exterior, right?
Yep.
And then maybe you'd want some specifics, which then these are going to more speak to the work order stuff, but it's interesting if the auditor often will take the time to write down, you know, what's going to actually go on the work order right here. They'll kind of be putting down some of this justification. So if this said vent to the exterior and terminate on west gable or something like that, now we have a much better justification, because first it just said the exhaust fan terminates in the attic, and I think a reasonable person could probably look at that and go, okay, that makes sense. That seems to be the reason why they're doing this. And then this next part where it's some instructions about how to fix it, vent to the exterior, that just backs up what we wrote there, and terminate on the west gable. And then yeah, I like the idea of listing out the materials and things like that. Listing out the specific materials is not required on the audit, but you're welcome to put it on the audit. I know there is a way, if you write those notes on the audit, you can copy them to the work order, but I also know how cumbersome that can be. So you're welcome to do what works best, but make sure you're putting enough information here to really explain why this measure needs to be done. So let's see, let's go to, I've got a handful more examples. How about health and safety smoke detector is needed?
Hey, Turner, check the chat. There's a question from Tina. She's
Okay.
asking about you being more specific on elements that you're looking for justification.
Okay, and that's Tina, if you're there or either in the chat or on on the call here, what do you mean? Was there an example that we left a little vague, or by going through some of this stuff, are we getting specific enough here?
So I was just wondering, like, you're wanting to state what they're seeing at that first example that you gave. You said it was good, but then you said it wasn't. So I was just wondering what specific elements you want in that comment. So they're identifying something, and then.
Was it this one here, the fix any other vented related problem?
Yeah, I see that one often.
Okay, yeah, and that's this was really what's like, basically fix any other venting related problem. Yes, in like that falls into the wheelhouse of weatherization if there is a vented related problem. But
when you review that, what elements are you looking for?
Okay, yeah. So that one's so
vague.
Sorry, go ahead.
It's so open-ended.
Yeah.
Right. That's quite frankly.
Yeah, it's very open-ended.
Well, hang on. If I'm monitoring that file and I see that, what I see is it's just a shotgun blast. They didn't really show or demonstrate that they actually investigated to find any venting problems. They threw it out there. It's like, oh yeah, if you just happen to find something, here's a blank check, go write it. And that's not the point. You can't make these open-ended blank check shotgun blast call outs on your work orders or on the audit. It has to be something detailed in what you found. And that's really that threshold or standard of care is, can you look at that and discern that a person physically went and looked at something and found the problem? And one of the things that Matt hasn't even brought up here is that most of you do an exceptional job of photo documentation. And you can take advantage of that by referencing your existing photos. You need to have a good system where you label or identify. You can't just say see photos, because some of your photos, there's 30, 40 pictures in there. I mean, that's not going to get you anywhere. But if you label, a photo water heater 1 and then reference see water heater 1, fix venting issue, the proverbial picture is worth 1,000 words.
Thanks for that. Yeah. And Tina, thank you for the question too. So I don't know if this will help or not. So this was the example we were talking about a few minutes ago. If just the measure name was more specific, instead of it saying fix any other venting related problem, and even though it's referencing the water heater, we still don't quite know what the venting related problem is. The venting related problem with a water heater, it could be a number of things. It could be that it was orphaned. It could be that now that we've added an ASHRAE fan, the 3-inch flue is no longer big enough and we need to make it 4. It could be that we just don't have enough combustion air in there now. And so this is one where we really need to be more specific about what it is we're trying to fix. And the justification is why. Why is this our problem? This would be better if it said fix water heater that was orphaned by the weatherization furnace replace. Then we know that we're going to fix an orphan water heater and that this is why we're going to own it, because weatherization was replacing the furnace. Or I really liked this was the example. This vague name is fine as long as there's some of these details that we're going to fix the orphan water heater, and there's the information the furnace is going to be replaced, assumably under weatherization or crisis. And so that's probably why the water heater was orphaned. So looking for some of those specifics. Does that help? Is anybody lost on any other items as well that we've covered so far? All right, and that's, I do, like, some of these things are so hard to explain that I really just wanted to take this time to go through some examples so you guys could kind of see, like, just what Brad was talking about when he looks at a file. Like, we know that's not your intent. We know your intent usually is not to just write a blank check in case something comes up, but we have to look at it from that worst case scenario. Like, if somebody came along and wanted to paint us in a negative light, how would or could they look at this? And so, you know, that's some of the things that we want to show you guys. You know, consider your audience when you're writing this. We want to show you how your audience reads some of this stuff. So, smoke detector, HSM smoke detector is needed. How do you guys feel about this one? This one has, I'll actually expand this. It's got like, this is the comments. It says there should be one detector on each habitable level of the dwelling. There should be at least one detector in sleeping room, each hallway or space immediately adjacent to sleeping room. How you guys feeling about that one? First off, does this one need any additional justification? Let's see, Tyson or Sean, one of you guys from down in Price, if you guys are able to, what do you think? Does a smoke detector need any additional justification? Or anybody else who can hit unmute and answer real quick?
Well, if you're supposed to document what's already there, no. I mean, if you have to show that you've investigated what's there, then I'm going to say no.
Yeah, so let me go back to my table really quickly. So on the health and safety measures, there are some no's that there's no additional justification required. So HSMs required on every home, such as ashtrays, smoke, and COs, they don't need any additional justification. Like, our program standard says that when we get to a house, if there are not sufficient smoke detectors in the home, then we will bring that up to the current code. We'll bring it up to the current code for COs. If the home doesn't meet the ASHRAE standard, we're going to make sure that it meets it before we leave. So just simply by saying we're going to install an ASHRAE fan, you don't need any other justification as to why you're installing the ASHRAE fan. And so smoke and COs and the vapor barrier, those are the ones that fall into that category. So really, on this example, you could basically leave this part blank and put nothing there. I do think this one's kind of an interesting one to talk about. I see this general language sometimes with some measures where it was kind of a cut and paste either out of the code book or out of the field guide. And I just wanted to say it's okay to have that there if that helps with whatever's going on at your agency and your processes. I feel like one valuable piece of information that's often missing from this measure is like how many smoke detectors were missing and where do they need to go? If an auditor would have taken the time, if the auditor knows this standard and they would have taken the time to say, you know, install one smoke detector up in the upstairs hall because there's nothing there. So now I know exactly what's going on and what needs to be done, you know, to accomplish this. And it's okay that you don't have that here, but that language really ought to be on the work order. I feel like we do find some of the work orders where they still just have this vague language that it's like, well, you know, the crew, it's now up to the crew to go and make sure that there's one detector on each habitable level of the dwelling and all that stuff. And it would be so much smoother and easier for everybody if the auditor said, okay, this house is missing 3 smoke detectors and this is where they need to go. Now the crew can go and install them in those exact locations. The QCI can verify that they're there. But I do see some of that vague language, but it's okay. Like if that's what's working, if that's what's helping at your agency, by all means, go for it. But really, as far as the justification goes, you don't need anything else other than smoke detector or detectors are needed. That's sufficient in this case. How about this one? This is an incidental repair, and it says replace knob and tube in attic. And the comment says this is an IRM to attic insulation. Anybody want to take a crack at this one? Let's see. How about Jesse or someone from Bragg? You guys run into knob and tube from time to time. How are you feeling about this measure?
Seems fine to me.
Sorry, say that again.
I would think it was fine.
Yeah, so it says replace knob and tube, and this is an IRM to attic insulation. Let's take a look at our table real quick. So for an IRM, the additional justification says, yes, there is additional justification required. It says you must document the ECMs that the IRM is incidental to. And so they've done that. They've said that this is an IRM or this is incidental to attic insulation. And then it says describe how it's going to protect or enhance the ECM. And this is really kind of meeting that definition, but explaining the why. So Jesse, you're saying, do you feel like this also explains the why?
Maybe not quite explaining the why, but I mean, yeah, no.
I'm a little on the fence on this one too. Like, I feel like we know our program well enough to know that if we're going to do knob and tube and it's incidental to attic insulation, it's because we needed to replace the wiring so we don't light the attic insulation on fire. As a best practice here, it would not hurt to explain that, you know, so to protect attic insulation from ignition or something.
But it's implied and it's okay, and I'm fine with
it. Exactly what Brad said. So I really think just what was there was probably plenty. If you went to the extra trouble of writing that extra sentence, first off, if you can get in the habit of writing those extra sentences on every one of these measures, then you will never forget to do it on the measures where you're absolutely required to do it. The other thing that might happen is some of the guys in the field who are brand new, who have no idea why we're doing this, might put 2 and 2 together just because you took the extra minute to explain why. So it's not going to hurt anything, but no, it's not. This probably would have been sufficient. Anyway, how about this? An NAM, attic access dam. And may want to take a stab at this one, and then looks like we're over time, so I'll land the plane after this here. Let's see, who have we not picked on yet today? How about Steve Fisher or Cade? You guys alive down there? What do you guys think about this?
I think that's pretty explanatory. I don't know that you need anything else there.
Yeah. So this one's a non-audited measure. And that chart just says for non-audited measures, you're going to put it as an NAM and then just document why it's necessary and allowable without an SIR. And so the comments say install dam around attic access to keep insulation in place. So yeah, that's probably sufficient. Like this is going to infer that there was no insulation dam there, and that we're going to install one. And the whole purpose is to keep that insulation in place. So yeah. Is there any other, well, actually, let's go ahead and end here, but if you guys have thought of any others while we've been talking and you're still wondering just how you would justify them, send me an email of what you think would be sufficient, and I'll send you a response if that'll work. So any other pressing questions before we end? All right, well, thank you guys for your time. I hope this was helpful. I just really encourage you to double check these when you're writing them, auditors, double check these QCIs, make sure that we're putting in some good justification for all of these measures. That would really help from our documentation process. So, all right, you guys have a great day and stay safe out there.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.